The agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the table this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, the city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission, please come forward and recognize and provide your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission and not to anyone else in the room. At this time, I ask that all cell phones, Blackberries, PDAs, or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting, please either be placed in silent mode or be turned off. Ms. Zarnicki, the roll call, please.
Mr. Aphidian?
Here.
Ms. Cruz? Mr. Edmonds?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Grant?
Here.
Ms. Koopa? Mr. Siedzika? Mr. Stratt?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Here.
The next agenda item is approval of the agenda. Could I have a resolution or?
So moved.
Mr. Tagle and supported by Mr. Aphidian.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Aphidian?
Yes.
The next item is the minutes of the April 28th, 2015 meeting. Could I have a motion to approve or amend?
I'll move for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson, and seconded by Mr. Strack.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Aphidian?
Yes.
Agenda item number 4 is public comment for items not on the agenda. Seeing no one in the audience for that, I would we move on to item number 5, the preliminary site plan review, file number SP 853-A, proposed Sandalwood South, west side of Rochester, north of Long Lake, at 5215 Rochester, Section 10, currently zoned R1C, one family residential. This is a consent adjustment.
Yeah, a real brief history on this. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of us who don't have,
Yeah.
never worked with consent adjustments, especially some of the newer members.
Yeah, so this, I believe this is the first consent agreement that we've worked with involving a residential development, especially a condominium development. And a little bit of history. Mr. Stratt, you may have been here when we talked about this, but I think you're the only member who was. This is a while ago. I'll try to summarize it really succinctly. The previous future land use plan, before our updated master plan, allowed for attached residential along Rochester Road. We got an application for a rezoning to R1T at the time to do an attached condo development. The Planning Commission made a positive recommendation to council, went to council, council denied it. So there was litigation, and we settled on the consent agreement that's before us this evening that allowed for a 12-unit attached condominium product as drawn up on a concept plan that was included in the agreement. So there's a conceptual site plan layout as well as a landscape plan that were both included and referred to in the consent agreement. And the requirement of the consent agreement is that any site plan that is submitted must go before Planning Commission for approval. It must be consistent with the site plan and the landscape plan. So there's not a lot of discretion here for the Planning Commission, to be honest with you, but it was specifically called out that the Planning Commission approved the site plan. Interestingly enough, Mr. Motzny pointed this out to me today. There is language, and Alan, if I misstated, please feel free to correct me. There's language in the consent agreement that essentially grants, as part of the consent agreement, grants a dimensional variance to the relationship between the garage for the existing house that's gonna remain and the new street that's gonna go in. So the variance could not be granted by the ZBA at the time because there was no application to grant the variance. So, and it didn't seem to make much sense to state in the consent agreement that's agreed upon by both parties that there's a variance and then send it to the ZBA and say, here's a variance application that you have to grant. So it didn't go to the ZBA.
Right.
Not quite sure why we had to go to the planning commission for similar type reasons, but nonetheless, we're here this evening. And with that introduction, I'll hand it off to Ben.
Thank you. Stole my thunder. So Brent gave a very thorough background, so I'll just go very quickly over the plans that were submitted. The applicant has submitted a plan for a 13-unit site, single-family detached site condominium project. 12 of the units are new units. The 13th unit is the existing house on the site, which will be incorporated as part of the development. As Brent noted, this is controlled by a 2006 consent judgment, which allows the property to be developed under R1T, under the 2006 ordinance, as well as the site plan, which is attached as an exhibit to the consent judgment. You have a copy of the consent judgment and the site plan as part of your packet. The consent judgment did require that this go through site plan review, but as Brent has noted, we have a little discretion in terms of what we can actually dictate to change this. We did review the plan in relationship to the 2006 ordinance, as well as the site plan that was attached as a consent judgment. We have found that it is consistent in regards to the site plan arrangement, the setbacks and height requirements, access and circulation, and lastly, landscaping. Our only comment in regards to the site plan is that we do recommend that the proposed sidewalk that extends north from Unit 12 be eliminated. This is basically a sidewalk to nowhere. It actually dead ends at the property and actually dead ends next to a bunch of landscaping. What we suggest in its place is simply that the applicant install some sort of crosswalk or crossing across the street between 11 and 12 to just north of 8, and that way replace this sidewalk with a crosswalk. That is the only change that we recommend to the site plan. With that, open for any questions.
Then with that crosswalk near 11 and 12 and over to near 8, would that be just a raised pavement type of thing?
No, when I say crosswalk, it can simply either can be striped or not striped.
Striped,
But what I'm really concerned about is making sure that there are ramps installed that are ADA compliant in that location.
Right.
It does not need to be raised. If he wants to stripe it,
Right.
I'm not guessing. I'm guessing there's not going to be a significant amount of traffic on this section of the road, but simply something to get people across. So I should note there is a sidewalk that runs along this edge down to Rochester Road. There is no sidewalk on the north, so this would allow people to get safely from 9, 10, 11, and 12 across the street and down the sidewalk.
Any other questions for the consultant? If not, is the applicant present?
Yes. Thank you
I'm afraid you're going to have to go to that, Mike, because if you want press on this, she watches the tape, and she always said to me, Cindy always says, "Be sure they speak into that microphone," because
It doesn't amplify, it records.
just records, yes, right.
Good evening. My name's Tony with CMA Design Services. We were hired by MJC to help process this consent judgment through so that we can develop the site. And Brent's office and Ben they did a great job helping us through the few we needed to work through. And I think we got a great product.
Any questions for the applicant? Well, I just want to say one thing. I thought the list of, I'm a gardener, so I like your list of plants and trees. I thought that was really good. Are there any existing trees on the site that are going to be preserved that you know of?
I don't recall the whole scenario, but I know there was a survey completed, and whatever that landscape plan identifies, we will follow.
Right. Well, that was part of the landscape plan was part of the consent agreement, so I didn't see you know, and the word was not a tree inventory.
I believe there was a survey in a,
Really? Oh, back in 2006?
no, just recently completed.
We didn't receive one or review it, I'll tell you that. I will know that there are a few trees that'll be preserved in the back end of the site, it appears.
Okay,
But
back behind the retention pond?
behind the retention pond, but I will also note that the applicant is exceeding the landscaping requirements that's required under the R1T with this plan.
Right, very good. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much.
You're welcome, thank you.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the table for there is a resolution on the table that takes care of the things that Brad was talking about.
The issue regarding the variance, we just wanted to clarify in the
Right,
resolution.
right. So someone wants to read
I'll move a
that?
resolution of,
Thank you, Mr. Hudson.
whereas the subject property is controlled by consent judgment that permits a 12-unit attached condominium project subject to preliminary site plan approval by the Planning Commission. And whereas dimensional variances from setback requirements allowing the existing home and relocated garage to be located as shown on the site plan are deemed granted in accordance with the consent judgment, therefore be it resolved that the preliminary site plan approval pursuant to Article 8 of the zoning ordinance is requested for the proposed Sandalwood South condominiums located on the west side of Rochester Road, north of Long Lake Road, parentheses 5215 Rochester, in parentheses, Section 10 within the R1C, one-family residential district, be granted subject to the following: to eliminate the sidewalk extending north from Unit 12 and provide an ADA compliant ramp and pedestrian crossing between Units 11 and 12 to Unit 8.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Hudson and seconded by Mr. Stratt. Is there any further comments on this resolution? If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Trent?
Yes.
Mr. Stratt?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Dahidian?
Yes.
Mr. Edmonds?
Yes. We look forward to seeing what's your timeline for doing it, you know?
When can I get permits?
Sorry.
When can I submit and get permits?
So your next step is engineering drawings with engineering, we'll work with them.
Okay.
And that's final site plan approval. That review and approval is administrative. And once you get a final site plan approval, you can walk to the counter at the building department and seek building permits.
Very good.
Great. Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
No, thank you.
Look forward to it. You're in my neighborhood.
Very quick, very good.
Good.
Very
Thank
good.
you. Good night.
The next agenda item is public comment for items on the current agenda. Seeing no one, we move to planning commission comments. And let's start with Mr. Hudson tonight.
One thing, when, about a year or two ago, when we approved the, at 7-Eleven at Crooks and Waddles, walkability was one of our concerns and one of our encouraging things. Friday, about 3:15, I was traveling west on Waddles at Crooks, waiting for the light to change, and there in the back entrance were about 30 kids lined up waiting to get in, and in the front entrance at the same time, about another 30 kids waiting to get in there. Now, I don't know what was going on, but certainly it was walkability because they didn't have any cars.
They all ride bikes?
I didn't see many bikes either.
Interesting. Mr. Stratt? Mr. Apathidian? Mr. Tagle?
One quick comment, the development just south of where I live, this is at Big Beaver and Alpine Road. There's a new 16 homes going in there. There is, I guess you call it a visual block between the sidewalk and the homes. And there, right now there's some spruce in there, some of which are dying off. But the point I want to make is this. The space allowed for that row of spruce is very narrow. I didn't measure it because it's all blotted dirt. But I would say maybe 15 feet before the house property. Those spruce are already, only not even a year old on the property, are already extending over the sidewalk. So when we get to at some point, our ordinance, maybe we should have something in there to specify the type of plants to be, we put in those visual block barriers, dependent on the width of that, that, whatever that setback is, or, you know, that berm, because those trees are gonna outgrow that setback in 2 or 3 years, and they're gonna be over the sidewalk, and what you're gonna end up with is, somebody's gonna shear them straight, you're gonna have a flat wall of spruce against the sidewalk, and it'll look hideous.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's the beauty of evergreens, they do get wide, more than people plan on it, but I agree. I have the same problem in my own yard, in a berm in the back, and I've already began to what I call limbing them up, if you know what that means. You know, you put them up.
Yep.
And so at least people can walk along there, and I think that's probably included somewhere in our ordinance where you have to, you can't impede walkability on a sidewalk, so.
Well, yeah, it's not specifically called out vis-à-vis the planning, but yeah, you're not allowed to impede the sidewalk, generally speaking. But, Tom, that's like not you, I'm talking about the person planting the tree. It really comes down to common sense and locating it and choosing
Yeah.
the right species, and, you know, this isn't the first time we've had this issue with the bottom row of branches protruding over a sidewalk.
Well, I talked with the home developer, he said he didn't put those in, it was Jonah Development that put those in as part of that property. And the developer for the homes is separate from Jonah. So he wasn't responsible for putting that in, but what he said he would like to have done is put in some type of other plant material, like maybe burning bush or forsythia or something that would have provided that visual block, but at the same time wouldn't intrude onto the sidewalk. In other words, what I feel we should do is specify plant material dependent on how wide that barrier is. That's all I'm saying.
I think what happened was, there were some homes that were, when the PUD was approved, was redesigned and then reapproved. There were some homes that were demolished, and I think what the Jonah Company intended to do was be good neighbors and plant the trees immediately
Yes.
to make the property be nicer to the neighborhood.
Right.
And
Right.
they're maybe class it up and are well-intentioned, but I think that was just an oversight. Yeah.
Well, I guess we can, if we see that in the future, we may want to raise that concern, that type of thing.
If I'm just saying, we could specify, depending on how the depth of that, whatever that barrier is, and say, you know, these are the type of plant material we should include, because it's only 10 foot wide. If it's 20 foot wide, maybe we'll specify additional ones. If it's 100 foot wide, we'll specify other ones. I'm saying, depending on that width, that way, we don't have to depend on the good judgment necessarily of the developer or his horticulturalist.
Well, they planted pretty large evergreens, like probably 8 to 10 footers there.
Yep, they sure do.
You can certainly get evergreens a lot cheaper and shorter and that type of thing, so it'd be several years before they would have to experience that, but, yeah.
In my office building, what they did was actually rerouted the sidewalk around the trees.
Yeah,
That's all.
but it's hard to do that in
Familiar
a
with that town.
whole row. Yeah, no, I've seen that before, even in Troy, you know. Kathy?
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Motsley?
No, thank you.
We're making good progress on some woodland protection or tree protection, whatever term you want to use, language. We will have that back to you at the next meeting. It won't be a draft ordinance, but it will be kind of framework for an ordinance and some of the regulations and standards we'll have incorporated. So look forward to that at your next meeting.
Thank you.
Couple things. One, some of you attended the luncheon. Actually, a lot of you attended the luncheon
Actually,
today.
everybody except one, I think, here tonight.
It was great.
It really was wonderful.
Really, really well done. The oil and mineral extraction draft has been reviewed by the city attorney's office. I got the marked up review copy yesterday. So the next step is gonna be having an internal meeting with staff to make sure everyone's on board, and then coming back to planning commission, getting the nod from planning commission, scheduling a public hearing and getting it, so that's exciting news. As Ben indicated, our intention is to have a draft, well, some draft language to talk about regarding trees at the next meeting. what I wanted to do is take just a couple minutes to talk really big picture. I didn't even want to hand out any language so that we didn't have any, specific language in front of us, but just, we talked about, at the last meeting when we talked about trees, we discussed our cluster development ordinance that we have had some developers tell us allows for clustering, but that really doesn't encourage clustering. There's some hurdles that have to be jumped over. It could do a lot better job of encouraging cluster development, more creative cluster development. And I guess we just wanted to kind of bounce off Planning Commission our ideas to start working on that. I'm not suggesting it's going to be lockstep with the trees, because I think the woodlands ordinance is we've got marching orders that it's our first priority. But certainly we can start thinking about and start working on the cluster ordinance. Ben and I have been talking about this, and I think it's an opportunity. Backing up a step, I've talked to every residential developer in the city. That's one of the the Mondrians and the Gary Abathera and all I've talked to all of them, and I've indicated that we keep seeing these 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square foot single family homes, and they're selling them. And there's some by you, Tom, that you talked about today. There's
Gary's job, yeah.
Gary's job, 5,500 square foot homes.
Yes.
And you can't build them fast enough. And Mondrian, you can't build them fast enough. And what we're not seeing is the 1,500 or 1,700 square foot home for the empty nesters. They worked in Troy their whole career. They raised their families in Troy, and they just don't want to maintain a 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square foot home. And there's that missing.
Yet they would like a new home.
They want to downsize, but they don't want to leave Troy. They want to stay in Troy. Their friends are here. Their families here. Their hospitals here. Their dentist is here. Whatever. Maybe the cluster ordinance could be a way to incentivize building these types of homes through maybe allowing for a bonus if you provide for more of these types of homes. In other words, if you can do 10 homes under the ordinance if you do typical 5,000 square foot, but maybe if you do the smaller homes, you can do 12 or 14 or whatever that number is. So you can use the cluster ordinance to not only preserve trees and preserve natural features, but you could also use it to incentivize a housing type or housing opportunity that is going to be attractive to a lot of people in the city. Does that make sense to everyone? I mean, is that something worthy of thinking about, you think? Looking at
There
it?
aren't really many large tracts left in Troy for that, but there's some parcels in the northeast corner that
Mhm.
could qualify for that. That might be a good spot to concentrate.
Yeah, and we're not necessarily seeing, and I agree with you, the large tracts that are sitting there, development ready, empty, huge, there's not many of those, obviously. But the backyards with Joe Maniaci's really good at finding these backyards and assembling, and maybe the days of the 25, 30, 40, 50 unit site condo are over with, but 6 or 7 units here, 7 or 8 units there, that adds up. But I guess I just wanted to have a really like 1,000-yard discussion on is the cluster option maybe is that something we could look at as potentially an approach to encouraging a type of housing opportunity that's not there. I'm not suggesting apartments. I'm talking about detached or maybe duplexes because we don't want to. We want to still be good neighbors. We don't want to negatively impact existing neighborhoods, but
even attached, I don't know why you don't want to necessarily
Well, I guess
preclude attached.
duplex, I'm saying as high as, I don't know if we want 4plexes or 6plexes
Right,
in an area that's predominantly single-family detached.
right.
But is that an approach you think that has some merit, is looking at?
I think that's some
housing
merit.
type?
It's some incentive for a developer to maximize that small area and still make a product that'll
Yeah.
sell.
We haven't had a cluster option submitted to us that I can remember. Just
One, Cedar Pines Woods,
Yes. Right.
just south of Benjamin off of Crooks.
Yeah.
What kind of response
in this discussions you had with the developers, what kind of reaction did you get from them? Did you,
I haven't yet, this is kind of the first, because what I've heard from them is they can't make enough money on them. They can sell the big ones all day long, so why build a small one where your costs are more per square foot when you can go bigger? So, I guess before I started and had the conversation with developers, I just wanted to float a trial balloon here and just really conceptually and see what the feedback was.
do you think we can come up with incentives that would overcome their financial concerns?
Well, I think the only way to do it is to make it financially worthwhile, and you do that by allowing more units per. Now, if you look at some of the larger homes in Troy, some of them are multi-generational homes. There's multi-generations in those buildings. They're large, and a lot of people, a lot of cars, a lot of trips per day out of the per unit. So you could have 4 or 5 cars per home making a lot of trips per day out of there. So from a traffic impacts, you could, if you're looking at trips per day, it could be a wash with smaller units and less trips per day, and having more smaller units but less trips per day versus the underlying zoning permits. So the traffic impact could be a wash. Those are just my kind of informal thoughts. I haven't scientifically looked at it or bounced it off our traffic engineer, but just kind of thinking aloud in terms of potential impacts. Less building footprint with the smaller homes, but more homes. So there's some kind of trade-offs here. But I keep hearing like a broken record. I'm getting emails, I'm getting phone calls, I'm getting people pop by saying, there's a gap here, and people are leaving the city that don't want to leave the city because they've got no options.
And they don't want to rent, so they don't want apartments and that type of thing, so I can understand that, really. What is the current bonus with the cluster option? Is it 20%?
Density-wise?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 20%.
But you have to preserve 50% of the.
There's just how the ordinance is written, there's a barrier, it's almost impossible to do a cluster in Troy.
And that's because of the open space, you have to have a 50% open space?
Not only that, you have to have, I think it's 150-foot buffer setback along all property lines, so you gotta have a pretty big lot to be able
Well,
to.
maybe those are conflicting parameters that we need to,
That's
to
what
do.
we're talking about, that's why we
Right.
wanna look at the cluster as altogether and figure out ways to, one, remove barriers to do it, and then two, provide incentives to also do it.
and I think it's wise, that you've at least started all this thinking, because I know as long as I've been on the planning commission, everybody says, well, we really need to incentivize the cluster option, otherwise, because we never get any that are submitted.
Right.
But I think if you do that and eliminate the barriers, I think in the process, somewhere along the way, we need to meet with, or you guys need to meet with developers and to see what they think of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because we can spend all day spinning our wheels on incentives and adjusting the ordinance, but
Right.
if they're not, they don't think it'll work.
Yep.
You have a few trusted developers that you could go to, so,
For sure.
very good.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for listening.
No, I think that's a good idea. I just want to reiterate that I really thought the luncheon was nice today, and I thought that the planning commission was certainly well represented. Glad to see many of the staff there too.
I just have one thought as kind of connecting this cluster option, the vision for the future, and putting it right next to what we just had tonight on the agenda. I think if we would pursue this, we would probably incentivize future projects that would be similar to this, where they would be in the middle of an R1C or an R1B with similar lots where the density would be a lot higher, and it would be similar to like R1C developments or some kind of parcel where you would allow a new kind of zoning where you wouldn't even allow 40-foot frontage, just to incentivize that. So I guess in the future, it might bring up certain type of development similar to this, just in the middle of an R1B, you would get an R1E, just incentivize it, so.
Well, and I think that's really good, Ollie. I appreciate your suggestions, and I think we're on the right track. However, got to remember, this particular one we had tonight went into litigation, even though hindsight, the planning commission probably made the right decision to approve it. If what he said was true, they actually approved it. It was the city council that reversed it. So,
I was only being factual, I was
Oh,
offering
no,
an opinion for the record.
yeah. But, no, that's good, I think. Okay, if there's nothing else, I think we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks.